The skyline of Atlanta shimmered like scattered diamonds against a velvet sky. At the very top of the Onyx Crown Tower, the most exclusive gala of the season was in full motion. Inside the glass-walled penthouse, the city's most powerful moved through the night like a well-rehearsed performance. Designer gowns brushed against perfectly tailored suits. Crystal flutes overflowed with champagne, and laughter floated in the air like music. And yet, at the center of it all, Malik Langston, one of the most influential black real estate developers in the country, seemed far away from the energy around him. His broad shoulders filled the frame of a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His deep brown skin caught the glow of the chandelier overhead. His sharp features remained unreadable, his attention fixed nowhere in particular. People approached with handshakes, proposals, investment figures, but nothing seemed to reach him. Until he saw her. Across the room, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, was a young woman he didn't recognize. She wasn't one of the guests. Her simple black blouse, pressed white apron, and black trousers marked her as staff. But there was something about the way she moved. Her hair was pulled into a low twist at the nape of her neck, a few strands escaping to frame her warm, elegant face. Her brown skin seemed to glow in the golden light, not from high-end makeup or jewelry, but from a quiet self-possession. She wasn't trying to be noticed, and that made Malik notice her all the more. She walked with the easy grace of someone who belonged to herself. Her focus was on her work, her eyes scanning the room, not to be admired, but to understand. Malik's phone slipped into his pocket, his investors and partners forgotten. Without even realizing it, he began to cross the room toward her. She sensed someone behind her, turned slightly, and her eyes met his, for just a second. But it was enough to shift something neither of them could name. "Can I get a coffee?" Malik's deep, steady voice cut through the hum of the party. The young woman's brows lifted slightly. "Coffee, at this party?" Her voice wasn't rude. It was unguarded, natural. It made him smile. "Exactly," he replied, as if her surprise was exactly the answer he'd hoped for. Her lips curved faintly. "It's downstairs. I'll need a minute." "I'll wait," he said, his dark eyes holding hers like he had nowhere else to be. She turned, disappearing into the service hallway, while Malik remained rooted to the spot. His thoughts, normally sharp and precise, felt scattered. Who was she, and why did he want to know so badly? Minutes later, she returned, carrying a single white porcelain cup and saucer on her tray. "Black. No sugar," she said confidently as she handed it to him. His brow lifted slightly. "How did you know?" I guessed. Her gaze met his again, steady and calm. He took a sip, surprised by how good it tasted. "Perfect." He held out his free hand. "Malik Langston." "I know," she said, shaking his hand gently. "You're kind of hard to miss. And you are Aaliyah Rhodes." He repeated her name slowly, as if he wanted to remember the sound. Aaliyah. There was a pause, not awkward, but charged, a thread quietly tying the moment together. Malik's gaze didn't waver. "So, what else do you do when you're not serving champagne to Atlanta's skyline?" "I'm a student," she replied without hesitation. "Architecture at Atlanta City University." His brow lifted. "Architecture? That's unexpected." Her head tilted slightly. "Why?" "Because most people here wouldn't guess that the most grounded person in the room is also the one studying how to build something from the ground up." That made her laughter soft. Warm sound that did something strange to his chest. He wanted to ask her more, to know what her dreams looked like. But a catering supervisor appeared nearby, motioning for her to return to work. "Duty calls," she said lightly. "Thank you for the coffee," Malik replied. "Anytime," she answered, then turned. Slipping back into the crowd, Malik stood where she had left him, holding his coffee, his attention far from the glittering skyline or the endless conversations around him. Atlanta stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, a city he had built pieces of with his own ambition. But all he could see was her Aaliyah Rhodes and deep in his chest. Malik Langston knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Malik Langston stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hand. Below him, Atlanta moved in its usual rhythm. Horns, pedestrians, ambition on every street. But inside his glass-and marble fortress, everything felt still. He had been awake since before sunrise. Sleep had avoided him. His mind kept circling back to one image, Aaliyah Rhodes. She had stepped into his world like a whisper in the middle of a storm, and somehow that whisper left an echo. Malik was not a man who got distracted, not easily. His days were full of numbers, contracts, and steel frameworks. Women came and went. They were polished, beautiful, and predictable. But none had stayed in his thoughts like she had, just with a smile and a cup of coffee. He set the cold mug aside, walked into his sleek kitchen, but even the curated perfection of his penthouse felt hollow. The imported marble, the designer, art, all of it suddenly felt like it was missing something. He opened his laptop. It didn't take long to find her. She was listed as a part-time hire with the catering agency for under a year. But another detail caught his attention: her second affiliation. Atlanta City University, School of Architecture. Malik leaned back, exhaling slowly. He remembered the way she had spoken about her studies and rehearsed, sincere. That kind of passion wasn't common. He closed the laptop, grabbed his coat, and stepped out. He didn't know exactly what he was doing, but he knew where he was going. The bell above the door chimed as he walked into a small cafe called Page, Pour, tucked between a laundromat and an old bookstore just blocks from the university campus. The place smelled of cinnamon, espresso, and paper. A comforting scent worlds away from the sterile air of corporate boardrooms. Malik was overdressed for the setting. His tailored coat and Italian shoes stood out among the college students hunched over laptops and paperbacks. But he didn't care. He scanned the room. And then he saw her. Aaliyah stood behind the counter, tying her apron with a pencil tucked behind one ear. She laughed at something a coworker said. Her posture relaxed, her presence grounded. She hadn't noticed him yet. He stepped closer. When her eyes found his, time seemed to slow again. She froze, not from fear, but surprise. "Mr. Langston," she said, straightening instinctively. "Malik," he corrected gently, a faint smile on his lips. She blinked, clearly unsure if this was real. "What are you doing here?" "I came for coffee," he said lightly, then added, "and maybe another conversation." Aaliyah glanced around, a little caught off guard. She wasn't embarrassed by his presence, just uncertain of it. "I'm not sure I'm allowed to," she said quietly. "I won't keep you from your work," he assured her. "I just wanted to see if maybe you'd let me sit after your shift." Her eyes searched his face. Her guard wasn't up, but she was cautious. He respected that. "Okay," she said, almost under her breath. "After my shift." He nodded and stepped back, choosing a quiet table in the corner. His presence commanding attention, but asking for none. 2 hours later, Aaliyah walked over, her apron gone, a denim jacket over her shoulders, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She sat across from him with a steaming mug of coffee in her hand. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here," she admitted. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes," he replied. She smiled faintly, but didn't rush to fill the silence. She sipped her coffee, studying him the way someone studies a building to see if it was built to last. "Why are you really here?" she asked finally. "You could be anywhere." "I could," he said without hesitation. "But last night I realized I hadn't really listened to anyone in a long time. Then you spoke, and I heard something I didn't know I'd been missing." Her fingers tightened slightly around her mug. "I'm not trying to impress you, Aaliyah," Malik added. "I just want to know more about you." She looked him in the eye. "I'm not used to people like you being interested in people like me." He didn't flinch. "Maybe people like me have been looking in the wrong places." The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It felt steady, charged with the weight of something forming. Aaliyah opened her sketchbook, turning it around so he could see drawings, floor plans, hand-sketched cityscapes with notes scrawled in the margins. "These are beautiful," he said softly, running a finger along one of the lines. "I think in dimensions," she shrugged. "I think about how people live, how space makes them feel. Not just how the light hits or how many rooms there are, but whether it feels like home. Something in Malik's chest tightened. He had built entire luxury towers and skyscrapers, but he had never once asked if they felt like home. He looked at her, the cafe fading into the background. "I'd like to see where you study," he said. Her brow arched. "And then what?" "Then maybe you'll let me show you something too." 2 days later, Malik Langston walked across the main quad of Atlanta City University. He wasn't wearing his usual blazer and tie, just a wool coat over a simple sweater, his hands tucked into his pockets like a man trying not to be noticed. Ironic, since Malik was the kind of man people always noticed. He didn't have a meeting, he didn't have a plan. He only had a quiet need to see her again. Aaliyah hadn't answered his last message. It wasn't that he had asked her anything specific, just a simple, "I enjoyed our coffee." No pressure, no expectation, but her silence made him restless, like a question left hanging in the air. He turned a corner and stopped. There she was, sitting on a wooden bench under the shade of an old oak, completely absorbed in a thick architecture textbook. A pencil rested between her lips, her fingers tangled in her hair. A stack of sketch pads sat beside her. A travel mug steaming quietly at her feet. Malik hesitated. Not because he didn't want to interrupt, but because he didn't want to ruin the moment. It wasn't just her beauty that stopped him though. She had plenty of it. It was her stillness, the way she belonged to the world without needing to announce herself. Aaliyah looked up, spotted him, and smiled. Not a wide, rehearsed smile, a soft one. Like she was surprised to see him, but not unhappy about it. "Are you following me now?" she teased, closing the book on her lap. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, walking closer. "And the universe might have given me a nudge." She laughed lightly. "The universe must be bored." Malik sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth from her coat, but not enough to cross any lines. The air between them carried that same quiet current he had felt since the first night they met. "You really read all those books?" he asked, glancing at her stack. "All of them," she said without hesitation. "I don't have the luxury of skipping steps. If I want to build something real, I have to earn it." That answer hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back. "Slightly, you know. I built my first development when I was 27. It was just a small apartment complex in South Atlanta. Nothing glamorous, but it meant something back then." "What changed?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He paused, looking off into the distance. "I did." Aaliyah looked at him. "Long enough for him to feel it. Do you ever miss who you were?" Malik turned his gaze upward to the branches swaying above them. "Sometimes I think he'd be disappointed in the man I became." "That's a heavy thought," she whispered. He looked at her. "What about you? What would the younger version of you say if she could see you now?" Aaliyah smiled faintly. "She'd say, 'We made it further than we thought.' And then she'd probably scold me for still being scared of success." They sat in a quiet moment. That didn't feel awkward, just deep. Malik gestured toward the sketchpad beside her. She nodded. He opened it and flipped through a series of drawings, hand-drawn floor plans, elevation studies, light studies, shaded renderings of community spaces. Nothing flashy. Everything functional, human, alive. "Why architecture?" he asked, still turning the pages. "Because buildings hold stories," she said, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Most people spend their whole lives walking through spaces designed by people who never knew them. I want to change that. I want to create places that make people feel safe, seen, and like they belong." Malik closed the pad carefully. He couldn't remember the last time someone had talked about design with that much heart. "You don't know how rare that is," he said. "I think you do," she replied softly. "You just forgot." The words landed with precision. A cool breeze swept across the quad, rustling the leaves at their feet. Aaliyah shivered slightly. Without thinking, Malik slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "I'm fine," she said, smiling. "I know," he replied, "but maybe I'm not." She looked at him, puzzled. "Maybe I need to do something good today," he added quietly. She didn't return the coat. She just adjusted it, looking away with a faint warmth in her cheeks. After a moment, her voice broke the silence. Why me? He turned to her. What do you mean? You could have anyone, models, executives, women who move in your world. Why are you here on a bench with a girl who still borrows textbooks from the library? Malik considered her question, searching for the right words. Because you remind me of something I lost. And maybe, I'm hoping you'll help me find it. Again, her eyes glimmered faintly, but she didn't speak. He reached into his coat still draped over her shoulders and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I have a property just outside the city. I'm building something there. I'd like your opinion, nothing formal, just your thoughts. She took the paper, read the address, and looked at him. You want my opinion? I trust your eyes more than I trust my architect's, he said simply. Aaliyah hesitated, then nodded. Okay, when? Saturday. She checked her phone. I finish work at noon. I'll pick you up. She shook her head lightly. No. I'll meet you there. I like arriving on my own terms. Malik smiled faintly. Of course you do. Saturday arrived with a crisp autumn breeze, the kind of clear, calm day that made Atlanta's skyline look like it had been polished overnight. Aaliyah Rhodes stood at the gated entrance of Langston Heights, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Her sneakers tapped softly against the pavement as she glanced up at the sleek metal sign engraved in silver. It shimmered in the sunlight, sharp and modern, like something from another world. This wasn't her world, not even close. But she had agreed to meet Malik here, and it wasn't just curiosity pulling her forward. It was interest, something far more dangerous. The security guard stepped forward. Miss Rhodes, she nodded. You're expected. Follow the private path. Mr. Langston is on site. She walked through the gate, the gravel crunching under her steps as she passed manicured hedges and tall pines. The pathway curved gently, and then she saw it. A glass-walled structure rose from the ground like a perfectly cut stone, surrounded by wide green spaces still under construction. Architects in hard hats moved around like busy ants, voices sharp and focused, and there, near a scaffold, stood Malik Langston. He wasn't in a suit this time. That surprised her. He wore a charcoal jacket over a black sweater, sleeves pushed up, dark boots dusted from the site. He looked different, less like a mogul, more like a man. When he saw her, his expression shifted, not with pride or formality, but with something quieter. Relief. You came, he said, stepping toward her. Said I would, she replied, keeping her tone steady. I wasn't sure. I'm not easily scared, she said lightly. He smiled faintly. I'm learning that. He led her deeper into the site, the unfinished structure towering above them. The building was all clean lines, floor-to-ceiling glass, and expensive imported materials. It was stunning, undeniably. But as Aaliyah took in the space, she felt something else distant. What do you think? Malik asked, watching her carefully. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked slowly, letting her fingertips trail along the raw cement walls, her eyes moving across the proportions, the light, the way the rooms were positioned in relation to the sun. It's beautiful, she said finally. But, he prompted, hearing something in her voice. She hesitated, glancing back at him. But it feels like a showroom, not a home. It's the kind of place people visit and admire, but not one where they'd actually live, heal, or belong. Didn't respond right away. There was no offense in his expression, only thought. What would you change? He asked. Aaliyah opened her sketchbook, knelt on a flat surface, and began to redraw parts of the floor plan in her own lines. Her pencil moved with precision and purpose, her voice growing more confident as she spoke. She opened certain angles to let in more light, shifted walls to create more intimate spaces, added community areas that encouraged connection rather than separation. Malik crouched beside her, watching closely, not interrupting. You see things differently, he said. Quietly, no, she replied, still sketching. I just see the people who might live here. When she finished, she turned the sketchbook toward him. Malik studied it for a long moment, then looked back at her. You should be designing projects like this, he said. She shrugged lightly. Maybe one day. No, he said firmly. Soon they stood again, the sketch between them like an unspoken agreement. I brought you here because I wanted your eyes, Malik said. But now, I'm wondering if what I really needed was your heart. Her breath caught. She looked away, unsettled by the weight of his gaze. I should go, she said softly, closing her sketchbook. I'll walk you to your car. I took the train. I'll drive you, he offered. She shook her head with a small smile. I like finishing things on my own terms, remember Malik's lips curved faintly. Of course you do. As she turned to leave, he called her. Name Aaliyah. She looked over her shoulder. Thank you. For what? For seeing something I forgot to look for. She gave him a soft half smile before walking away. Malik stood there long after she disappeared down the path, her sketch still in his hand. He looked back at the structure rising behind him, all glass, steel, and strengthened for the first time. It felt hollow, because for the first time, he understood what it meant to build something without a soul. It had been a quiet week since the visit to Langston Heights. But Malik Langston hadn't stopped thinking about Aaliyah's words. It feels like a showroom, not a home. He kept replaying the moment she said it, the way her pencil had moved across the paper, reshaping everything he thought he knew about his own project. She hadn't spoken like a student trying to impress. She had spoken like someone who had lived in spaces that didn't protect, that didn't nurture, and who had chosen to imagine something better. On Thursday morning, he sent her a short message. Meet me at 11 o'clock. I want to show you where it all began. There was no explanation. No location. She hesitated at first, then replied, I trust you, send me the address. When her Uber pulled up, it stopped in front of a faded brick building in a forgotten corner of South Atlanta. The street was quiet, lined with old oak trees that leaned toward the sidewalk, as if they'd grown tired from years of watching the world pass by. Malik stood by the gate, his hands in his coat pockets. His expression was calm, but there was something heavier in his eyes. Memory. Aaliyah stepped out, looking around. The building was small, modest, a little worn. The windows were foggy, the bricks chipped. This was your first project? She asked. He nodded. Built it when I was 27, back when I thought I could change the world. She stepped closer. What happened? Malik didn't answer right away. He unlocked the gate and pushed it open. Come inside. I'll show you. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and dust, but it was clean. The walls were lined with photographs, some black and white, some newer showing families, construction crews, and neighborhood events. This used to be a vacant lot, Malik said. My father was a bricklayer. He used to bring me here when I was a kid. Said one day someone should build homes where real families could live safe, affordable, and decent. Aaliyah paused. In front of a photo of a much younger Malik in a hard hat, dust on his shirt, and determination in his eyes. That was me. Before the money changed the way I looked at everything, they stepped into a small courtyard. Children's toys were scattered near a bench. A few tenants passed by with grocery bags, nodding politely to Malik as they walked in. I wanted to help people, he said. Not just build towers for the elite. But the more successful I became, the less I listened to my instincts. Or to people. She looked at him, her voice was soft but certain. You still care, or you wouldn't have brought me here. His dark eyes met hers. I care more than I've allowed myself to admit. He led her to a narrow stairwell and up to the rooftop. It wasn't glamorous, no pool, no designer lounge chairs, just a view of the neighborhood. Laundry lines stretched across other rooftops. Rows of old brick apartments sat quietly under a pale afternoon sun. I used to come up here after long days, he said, stepping closer to the edge. Just to breathe. Aaliyah walked to the railing, leaning on it gently. You could build more of this, spaces that matter. That's why I brought you here, he said, turning to her. To remember, and to ask you something. She turned to face him. Ask me, what? Would you help me build again? Something with meaning. From the ground up. Not just designs or concepts, but your vision, your heart. Her breath caught slightly. Are you offering me a job? She asked carefully. I'm offering you purpose, Malik said. Inside my company. By my side. Aaliyah looked back at the neighborhood. I don't need a savior, Malik. I know, he said softly. That's not what this is. You don't need me, but maybe I need you. His words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. They stood in silence for a moment. The wind pulling gently at her hair, the city murmuring quietly below them. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice steady. He nodded, giving her space. As they walked back down the stairs, Aaliyah let her fingers trail against the worn walls. She stopped at another photo. This one showed a man in dusty work clothes, an arm wrapped around a boy with familiar dark eyes and a sharp jawline. Your father, she asked. Malik's expression softened. He never wore a suit, but he built more than I ever did. She looked at him. Then let's build something he'd be proud of. They stepped out of the building and walked together down the street. On the side of a brick wall, a mural painted by local children stood faded but vibrant. I used to think legacy meant skyscrapers, Malik said. Now I'm wondering if it's something much quieter. Legacy is how people remember how you made them feel, Aaliyah said. He looked at her, and in that moment, he knew she was no longer just someone he'd met by chance. She was becoming the mirror through which he saw the man he once wasn't. The man he could still be. As they reached the corner where her ride was waiting. She paused. I'll give you my answer soon, she said. But not because you're offering me an opportunity. Why then? He asked. Because I believe in what we could build together. She opened the car door, then hesitated. Malik, yes, there's something in your eyes now, something I didn't see before. What's that? Conviction, she said softly, and maybe a little hope. The car pulled away slowly. Malik stood on the sidewalk, watching until she disappeared around the corner. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. It was a Tuesday evening when Malik Langston received an unexpected message from Aaliyah. Dinner at my place. It's nothing fancy, just real. Malik stared at his phone for a moment, a slow smile forming. No one had invited him for just real in a very long time. He didn't send a driver. He didn't wear a suit. Instead, he arrived at her building in South Atlanta wearing dark jeans, a navy sweater, and carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked up from a corner vendor. The elevator was out of service, so he took the stairs. For flights, he didn't mind. The door opened before he could knock twice. Aaliyah stood there in bare feet and an oversized t-shirt tucked into faded jeans. Her hair was loosely pulled back with a pencil, her face bare and natural. She looked like herself, unfiltered, unguarded. Hi, she said simply. Hi, he replied, handing her the flowers. I wasn't sure what to bring, she smiled. They're perfect. Her apartment was small, but it felt alive. The furniture was mismatched, but full of personality. Books were stacked on tables and shelves. Sketches and framed, some pinned covered a wall above the couch. The smell of garlic and roasted vegetables drifted from the kitchen. On the small dining table, two mismatched plates were set beside a single lit candle. This is beautiful, Malik said, looking around. It's home, Aaliyah replied, her voice quiet but certain. Just then, a woman stepped from the hallway, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was cautious but kind. You must be Mr. Langston. I am, Malik said respectfully. It's a pleasure, Ms. Rhodes. The woman laughed lightly. Ms. Rhodes makes me feel old. Call me Margaret. Dinner was served without ceremony. Pasta primavera, warm bread, and conversation that drifted from childhood memories to neighborhood stories. Malik noticed how Aaliyah's voice carried a different kind of lightness, at home, relaxed, unguarded. She wasn't performing. She was just being herself. Margaret watched them carefully. Her eyes were warm but observant. She asked Malik questions, not invasive, but intentional. Tell me about your family, she said at one point. Malik didn't hesitate. My father was a bricklayer. My mother worked nights as a nurse. They both dreamed of something more for me. Sometimes I wonder if I left too much of them behind chasing it. Margaret gave a quiet nod. Chasing doesn't mean forgetting. But you do have to choose what you carry with you. Later, Margaret excused herself with a knowing smile. Disappearing into her room with a book, Aaliyah and Malik moved to the small living room. A record played softly in the background, the warm tones of old jazz filling the air. They sat on the old couch, their shoulders nearly touching. "Thank you for this," Malik said. "For what?" Aaliyah asked, curling her legs under her. "For letting me see your world." "It's just a small apartment," she replied. "No," he said softly. "It's a place with love in the walls." She smiled faintly, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "I always wanted to offer my mum more. She gave up so much for me. And this life, it hasn't been easy." Malik turned toward her. She raised a woman who dreams with both feet on the ground. That's more than most. The room fell into a quiet stillness. Not heavy, just full of unspoken understanding. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. Aaliyah sighed. "It happens. The breakers it'll come back on in a minute." But the room stayed dark. Malik reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight, but Aaliyah touched his hand. "Wait, sometimes it's nice to sit in the dark." He paused, then placed the phone face down. They sat together, the only light coming from the small candle still flickering on the table, in the hush. Something shifted. Malik's voice was low. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why me?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was soft. "Because you stopped looking at me like I was someone you needed to fix. You just started listening." His chest tightened. "And you why me?" Her eyes searched his face. "Because every time I walk away from you, I start questioning everything I thought I knew." The silence deepened, charged but warm. Aaliyah's hand found his resting gently over it. They stayed like that until the power returned. The overhead light humming softly back to life. "I should probably go," Malik said, his voice low. "You could stay a little longer," she said, not looking at him. So he did. They didn't kiss that night, but something deeper happened. A promise, built in silence, stronger than anything physical. When he finally stood to leave, she walked him to the door. "Good night, Malik," she said. He paused in the doorway. "I haven't felt this much peace in a very long time." Aaliyah's eyes were steady. "You're welcome here, any time." He left with the scent of garlic and lavender clinging to his sweater, and the warmth of her hand still lingering against his own. As he walked down the stairs, a quiet thought stayed with him. If this was what real felt like, how could he ever go back to anything else? A few days after that quiet evening at Aaliyah's home, Malik Langston sent her a simple message. "Dinner, just us, my place, no staff. I'll cook." Her reply came almost immediately. Yes, the sky was a soft blend of rose and steel the night she arrived. From his penthouse, the Atlanta skyline stretched endlessly, the city lights glowing against the glass walls. But inside, the space felt different tonight. Gone was the usual cold elegance. The lights were dim, the air warm. A faint scent of rosemary and butter drifted from the kitchen. A record player spun a slow jazz tune in the background. When she knocked, Malik opened the door himself. He wasn't in a suit, just dark slacks and a fitted black shirt. "You weren't lying," Aaliyah said, with a small smile, glancing at the table set for two. "I wanted tonight to feel different," he said, helping her out of her coat. "Because it is." He led her toward the kitchen. On the counter, a simple meal was waiting. Pan-seared chicken, roasted vegetables, a bottle of red wine breathing beside two glasses. No chefs, no staff, just him. They ate at a small table by the window. No centerpiece, no formal setting. Just two plates, two glasses. And the steady rhythm of conversation that had been building for weeks. They talked about everything and nothing, her favorite books as a child. His first job working construction, the way city lights could look like stars when your heart was too heavy to dream. At one point, their hands brushed, neither of them pulled away. Later, Aaliyah wandered barefoot through the penthouse, her fingers trailing along the piano he never played. Malik watched her quietly. his gaze following her movements. She stopped by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. "You really do live above the world," she said softly. "I used to think that made me powerful," Malik replied. From behind her, now, I just want to be close to someone who makes me feel grounded." She turned to him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then came the kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't cautious. It felt like the meeting of two souls who had already said 1,000 unspoken things. Malik kissed her like a man who had waited his whole life for the right permission not to conquer her, but to be let in. He touched her cheek, her hair, the small of her back with care, not hunger. Aaliyah leaned into him like a question finally being answered. When he led her to his bedroom, she didn't hesitate. The lights were low, the windows framing the city like a painting. But Malik saw nothing except her. He slipped her blouse from her shoulders slowly, watching her as if each movement was sacred. She stood before him, her eyes open, vulnerable, but unafraid. "Aaliyah," he whispered, brushing his thumb gently across her collarbone. "If this is too fast, it's not," she said, her voice trembling softly. "I chose this, I choose you." He nodded, swallowing the emotion tightening his chest. They undressed each other slowly, breathing in each second. There was no rush, no choreography, just trust, discovery, and connection. When he entered her, she gasped not from pain, but from the overwhelming surrender of the moment. Then he felt it, the tension in her breath, the stillness in her body, the way she held on to him like she was searching for something steady. He stopped immediately, concern in his voice. "Leah, are you okay?" She nodded, eyes closed. But when she opened them again, there was a truth in them that took his breath away. "I've never done this before," she whispered. "You're my first." Malik froze. For a long moment, he didn't speak, he just looked at her. "Really?" His voice cracked slightly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't change what I want," she said softly. "I trust you. That's all that matters." Malik touched her face like it was made of glass. "I will never forget this moment," and he meant it. The rest of the night unfolded in quiet waves, touches that memorized every inch of her, kisses that felt like promises, breath shared like prayer. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, it wasn't the physical act that stayed with him. It was the stillness after the sacred quiet of two people who had crossed an invisible line, not just of bodies, but of hearts. Morning came softly, the light slipping across tangled sheets. Malik woke first. Aaliyah lay curled beside him, her breathing steady. He slipped out of bed, stepped into the bathroom, then returned, and stopped. There it was, a faint mark on the edge of the sheet. A drop of red. He didn't feel shock. He felt reverence. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he touched the fabric gently. The weight of what she had given him, not just her body, but her trust, filled his chest. He looked at her still sleeping, and in that quiet moment, Malik Langston knew he had fallen in love. Not the kind that comes with grand gestures or declarations. The kind that builds slowly, through truth and time. Through dinner at her place, through sketches on rooftops, through moments of silence on an old couch. Aaliyah stirred, her voice soft. "Morning." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Good morning, love." Her eyes opened, searching his face, as if she was afraid something might have changed, but all she saw was, "Oh, you okay?" she asked quietly. He nodded, whispering, "You gave me something sacred last night." She pulled the sheet closer. "I gave it to the only person I ever wanted to give it to." Malik drew her into his arms, and in the warm light of that morning, wrapped in white sheets, Malik Langston understood something new. Some foundations aren't built with steel or stone. They're built with trust and love. The days after that night at the penthouse were different. Not loud, not dramatic. But Malik Langston felt the shift every time he walked into his office. Every time he looked out at the city from the glass walls of Langston Enterprises. For years, his buildings had been monuments to wealth. Towers of glass and steel meant to impress, to stand as proof of his success. But now, as he reviewed blueprints, all he saw were hollow spaces. He thought of Aaliyah. Of her sketches, of her words at Langston Heights. It feels like a showroom, not a home. That sentence lingered like an echo in every conference room, in every investor call, in every project proposal that landed on his desk. One morning, he called for his head architect. "We're postponing the Langston Heights Phase 2, Malik said. The man looked startled. Postponing? The investors won't, they'll adjust. Malik interrupted, his voice calm but firm. We're shifting. Focus. I want proposals for community-based developments, affordable housing, mixed-use spaces, real neighborhood projects. The architect hesitated. That's a very different direction. Malik's gaze was steady. Exactly. Later that week, he picked up Aaliyah outside her university. She slid into the passenger seat, looking at him curiously. You didn't tell me where we're going, she said. I wanted it to be a surprise. They drove south, away from the polished skyline, through neighborhoods where storefronts were shuttered, and playgrounds stood faded but full of history. Eventually, Malik parked in front of an old brick building, its windows boarded, its paint peeling. The faded sign above the door read Hope Community Center. Aaliyah stepped out, looking up at it. This place has been closed for years, she said quietly. It was built in the 1960s, Malik explained. It used to be the heart of this neighborhood. After-school programs, senior classes, basketball leagues. It was more than a building. It was a home for people. She ran her hand along the rough brick. And you want to bring it back? Want us to bring it back, he said, his voice steady. Her head turned sharply. Us. Malik took a folded set of papers from his coat pocket. Preliminary sketches for a restoration. I don't just want to rebuild, I want to rebirth. And I don't trust anyone's vision for that more than yours. Aaliyah unfolded the papers, her brow furrowing as she studied them. The layout was good, but clinical functional, not alive. She looked up at him. This needs more than walls and paint. It needs to feel like people belong here again. Spaces for kids. A reading lounge. Rooms that invite conversation, not just activity. Malik smiled faintly. Exactly why I brought you here. They stepped. Inside, dust floated in the light streaming through cracked windows. Old posters still clung to the walls. Corners curled with age. Aaliyah wandered through the rooms slowly, her mind already shaping new spaces in her head. Malik watched her, the way her eyes scanned the details, the way her hands gestured as she explained ideas, the way her voice carried a certainty that made him want to listen. You talk about this place like you can already see it finished, he said. I can, she replied. Because places like this matter. More than another glass tower ever will. Malik's chest tightened. He hadn't told her yet, but something about her words made him realize this wasn't just a project for him anymore. This was personal. As they stepped back outside, Aaliyah looked at him. Why me, Malik? You could hire the best architects in the country for this. He met her gaze. Because you build with your heart, and that's the only thing that can bring a place like this back to life. She looked away briefly, her emotions carefully measured. Okay, she said finally, I'll help. But this has to be more than just a Langston Enterprises project. The community has to be part of it too. He nodded without hesitation. Agreed. As they stood there, the cold air sweeping around them, Malik felt something rare purpose, not the kind tied to profit margins or prestige, the kind that changes the way a man sees himself. And he knew it had started with her. The following weeks moved with a rhythm unlike anything Malik Langston had experienced in years. The Hope Community Center was no longer just a boarded-up shop, was alive with possibility. Every morning, Malik arrived to find Aaliyah already there, sleeves rolled up, sketchbook in hand. Her voice animated as she worked with the construction team. She didn't just design from an office. She walked the rooms, stood in the sunlight filtering through new windows, adjusted door placements so light would fall into common areas, suggested wall colors that would make the space feel warm and inviting. Malik had built dozens of developments in his career, but never like this. He wasn't just signing off on plans, he was working alongside her, seeing every line, every choice, through her perspective. One afternoon, they stood in what would soon be the reading lounge. Sunlight spilled across fresh paint, the smell of wood and plaster still sharp in the air. "You know this isn't just a building anymore," Malik said, leaning against the doorway. Aaliyah looked up from the blueprints spread across a table. "What do you mean, this place? It feels different, like it's got a heartbeat again." She smiled faintly. "That's what happens when you build for people instead of numbers." He stepped closer. "And that's why I trust you." They continued working, day after day. Meetings with local residents, volunteer cleanup weekends, small fundraisers that brought neighbors together in ways Malik hadn't seen in years, and through it all, something deeper built quietly between them. Late one evening, after the construction team had gone home, they walked the nearly finished hallways. The building hummed with quiet potential. They ended up in the main community room, where fresh light fixtures glowed softly. Malik reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Aaliyah's brows lifted slightly. "What's that?" He stepped closer, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant silver band. Inside the band, an inscription read, "From the ground up, her breath caught." "This isn't that kind of ring," he said softly. "Not yet. This is a promise. A reminder of what we're building here, and what I hope we'll keep building." Together, she took the ring gently, turning it in her fingers. "You don't have to give me anything, Malik. I know," he said, his voice steady. "But I wanted to give you something that would remind you that your vision changed more than this building. It changed me." Her eyes softened, emotion flickering just beneath the surface. She slid the ring onto her finger, the silver catching the light. "It's perfect," she said. They stood there in the quiet room, the scent of fresh paint and sawdust around them, the sound of the city faint beyond the walls. For the first time, Malik felt like he wasn't just building a structure, he was building a life. And it was a life that felt like home. The grand reopening of the Hope Community Center drew more people than Malik Langston had expected. The wide lawn in front of the building was filled with neighbors' children holding balloons. Older residents in folding chairs, students, parents, volunteers. The brick walls, once faded and cracked, now stood strong in a rich, warm tone. New windows reflected the sunlight, and the front doors stood open, welcoming everyone in. Banners reading, "Hope Lives Here Again," hung across the entrance. Malik stood near the steps, greeting people as they arrived, his suit jacket unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up. He wasn't there as the billionaire developer. He was there as a man who had promised this community something, and kept it. Aaliyah moved through the crowd, clipboard in hand, speaking with volunteers, guiding children toward the art room, laughing with elders as they admired the new reading lounge. When their eyes met across the lawn, Malik felt the same quiet pull he had felt that first night on the rooftop of the Onyx Crown Tower. As the ribbon cutting began, Malik stepped forward with Aaliyah at his side. "This isn't just my project," he told the crowd, his voice carrying, "This is ours, built for the people who have called this neighborhood home for decades. And it wouldn't have happened without the vision of someone who reminded me what building really means." He glanced at Aaliyah, who gave a small, humble smile as the crowd applauded. The ribbon was cut. The doors opened. The community poured inside. Laughter, music, and the sound of life filled the building once again. Later that afternoon, when the crowd had thinned and the rooms had quieted, Malik found Aaliyah standing alone in the main hall, looking around as if she was memorizing it. "You made this happen," he said softly, stepping behind her. "We made this happen," she corrected, turning to face him. He looked at her for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "There's something I haven't told you." Her brows furrowed slightly. "What?" He took her hand gently, guiding it to rest over her own stomach. Her breath caught. She looked into his eyes, the realization spreading across her face. Aaliyah Malik's voice was steady but full of emotion. "We're not just building community centers anymore." Her lips trembled in the faintest smile. "You're going to be a father." Malik felt a wave of emotions crash over him: surprise, awe, a quiet joy that rooted deep in his chest. They stood there in the middle of the space they had rebuilt, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and footsteps, holding each other in a moment that felt like the truest foundation either of them had ever laid. Outside, the neighborhood moved with its usual rhythm. Inside, Malik and Aaliyah stood at the start of something new. A new life, a new family, and a new chapter built, as always, from the ground up.